All right, hello everyone. It's Low Code Campfire, Friday, February 18th, episode number 38. So welcome everyone. Quick run through. This is a weekly community gathering that we get together and share techniques, challenges, experiences. It's all skill levels. Please come and either share your expertise or learn from the group. We have recorded all these on our Plantin' YouTube channel. So subscribe to youtube.com/plantinap. And we run a pretty informal agenda. There's we'll do some first call stuff in case anything's important. Bring it right to the front so you can jump to the front of the line. Otherwise, we have some things that have been submitted, but it's an open format. We just talk around the campfire. As for guidelines, just ask that if it's noisy behind you that you mute. And you can submit questions and topics in advance. Use the link that's in the emails that we send. And with that, I'll say hello. How are you guys doing this morning?
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Good morning.
So
Well,
do we have to ask Jerry what he's wearing this week?
Yeah, for those of you who missed last episode, we did have to edit out some of that. It was just too much to take.
Okay. This is to verify that I have clothes on today. Okay.
Way to go, Jerry.
All good. I dressed for the occasion, Ben.
All right.
Thank you for that.
All right, so aside from answering that burning question, this is first call. Do we have anything going on that needs to be solved right up front?
I don't have a thing to solve, but I did submit it. I don't know if you saw it, Dale. There was
did.
something that I wanted to kind of let everybody know about and discuss. I may have to drop off call early, so I don't want to wait too late because I may have to go. But if anyone else has a burning thing, they can go first.
I'll tell you what, we'll take that up as the first order of business when we got out of this. So anything else?
Just a shout out to you. Thank you for the advice on the left and right side, where the left side is the list and the right side is the details in the submissions that you've got up there. That helped quite a bit. Thank you. I was looking for something like that.
Absolutely. I'm gonna go through that if a little bit. Awesome. Did you already implement it or?
Oh no. Just seeing it was a great load off my mind that it's doable. Now I can go in there and figure out what you did. Little monkey see, monkey do, and create it. But that's great.
Well, that helps me understand what how deep to go, because if you'd already solved it, I would hit it at a high level. We'll look at all the actions. There's not that much behind it. It's really pretty easy. So good. All right. What else? Okay, here we go. Let's go with Ben. You asked about this is the one you're talking about, right? Differences in results in a razor versus
That is correct.
MyToken. So it sounds like you have a pretty specific thing you want to dial us in on it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if for those that were on the call last week, if you recall, I had posed this question about that I had a MyToken that was a database token returning JSON. When that token was then used in a Razor script. When the token was used using the square bracket notation, the JSON came in perfectly fine. I was able to use it, parse it, no problem. When I used the dot notation, so it was namespace dot token name, however you want to use it, and return that directly into a variable in Razor script, it would fail. Something about it was not formatted correctly. Displaying the results both ways looked identical in the MyTokens app. Didn't show any differences. I threw it into a difference, looker online. It said both were identical. So I delved a little deeper. I ended up breaking out the strings into a character array and then
Mhm.
converted every character to an ASCII value. And
Yep.
then I basically looked at this ASCII array to see if any of them had maybe a hidden character or whatever. Ultimately, what I noticed, what I found, was that square brackets being returned in a JSON, if you're using the dot notation, are being automatically converted to HTML entity codes. So the open bracket square turns into ampersand pound 91 semicolon, close is 93 semicolon. That doesn't happen if you use the square notation directly in a string. But if you use the dot notation, it will make that replacement. Then it got even trickier. I figured, okay, well, I'll do a replace. I'll look for ampersand pound 91 semicolon and do a replace back to a bracket. You can't do that in RazorScript, because when you enter in, search for quote, ampersand, whatever, that HTML entity code also gets replaced and turned into a bracket at time of run. So it's not actually searching for the entity code, it's searching for a bracket again, which is never going to find because it doesn't exist in the actual code you're trying to replace. So the only way to actually do that replacement, if you decide to use dot notation, is reversing the string and searching for the entity code in reverse. So instead of ampersand pound 91 semicolon, it's semicolon 19 pound ampersand. Do the replace and then reverse your string back again to normal. It's a weird way of doing it, but anyone who prefers to use dot notation, be aware if you have any brackets in your code, you have to do this, otherwise it's not going to come out right.
Okay, so I almost understand, but let's.
Sorry, that's a feature of Razor, though, isn't that? That's Razor trying to protect you from yourself.
Possibly, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if it's just that the code in RazorScript is being pre-processed first by Plantain app and those replacements are being made. I really don't know where that is happening. I will say that with the usage of the token itself, square bracket versus dot notation, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that is a Plantain app replacement.
Mhm.
Because if the square notation is coming out perfectly fine and it's leaving the brackets alone, then I don't believe it's the token. It's when you use the dot notation, those brackets are being switched. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's Plantain app that's on that particular usage is doing a replacement on you, returning the data. That's why the two methods are returning data differently.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Do you happen
Ben,
to have, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ben, Jerry here. I'm just going to congratulate you. You have graduated from new school programmer to old school programmer. I can tell you're a good bit younger than most of us on this board, and I'll just tell you, welcome to the world of computer programming, my friend. It's always
Jerry,
flip-flop, twist, burn.
I'm a lot older than I look.
But I mean, and in programming years, you're probably 100 years old. I get it. But as you were saying, you had to flip the string around to fake it out. And I'm just thinking back over the years, how many times we've have to pull these tricks just to make it work. It's unfortunate, but it's sad but true. But hey, congratulations on finding that. Being clever enough to sniff out the ASCII value was something I had to do on a JSON string coming back from authorized.net. Had a mysterious question mark and position 1 of the JSON string. Happens to this day. All of my AuthNet code has to, very first thing it does before I parse the JSON is rip out character 1 because I know it's an embedded question mark that you can't see. And so anyway, I'll leave it at that. I wish I could help you, but if it turns out to be a PAA issue, maybe the boys over there can recognize that and fix that in such a way that we guys like me won't have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if the two methods return the data the same exact way. That's part of the biggest thing, was that calling the same exact token two different ways was actually returning the same value, but in two different formats. But what really got me the most was the fact that when you try to output the value, they look identical, because when you output it, those HTML entities are then replaced visually with their actual code. So everything looked like it was a bracket. But in reality, it wasn't a bracket. It was actually an HTML entity, but because it's being displayed on a browser, you don't see that. It wasn't until you break it out into an actual ASCII array character and then literally look at all the numbers that you notice one number was replaced by 5 numbers. And then that's when it, replacing it back determined what it was that it was being replaced with. So it's a very time-intensive deep dive into debugging the string, but it was the only way to see it, because other than doing that, there was no way you'd be able to tell.
It's another good case why programmers become really good detectives, should they need to be. Good job.
So first of all, the takeaway is you have, for your particular thing, you've solved it. You're trying to help us avoid a landmine.
Correct, because I know I've heard more and more often that people are using JSON and such like that, and I just want to make sure that no one falls into that pitfall, that if you are returning JSON information within a Razor script, got to be very careful in your way of calling whatever token or building the JSON information.
Okay. So next thing then is, I mean, okay, so now you're from an idea standpoint, you mentioned that you broke it down into an array and spotted the differences in the ASCII codes. So I didn't quite gather why the reverse string ended up solving the problem, but could manipulating the numerics, in other words, instead of looking for brackets, if you were to manipulate the numeric codes, looking for specific number sequences and fixing them within the array and then reconstituting the string, would that be another solution?
That could potentially work, but it would be a much longer way of doing it, because you would have to take the string, you would have to then convert it to a character array, then from the character array you have to then convert it to an ASCII array, then you'd have to look through each one. It winds up being much longer. This was a very simple way, or the most simplistic way I could think of doing it. And just to touch on what you were saying, the reason I had to do the reverse, again, in the Razor script, if you type in quote ampersand pound 91 semicolon end quote, and you're thinking, okay, I'm searching for this string in another string, that ampersand pound 91 semicolon gets converted at time of run to an open bracket.
Right. So now it's no longer
looking for what I told it to look for.
Yeah.
So if you reverse it, semicolon 19 pound ampersand doesn't get converted to anything. It's not a code that Razor script is going to identify as anything. So you have to basically look at the string and do your replacements backwards in reverse, and then switch it and reverse it yet again to turn your string back to, normal direction.
Would the HTML decode and the HTML raw, it's the part of the HTTP utilities in Razor, would those have been any good to you, or are you working at a different level?
Not 100% sure if the HTML decode would have caught that, because these are HTML entities using the ASCII code, so it's pounds 91. It's not a regular HTML code.
Okay.
So I don't know if the HTML decode will decode the pound ASCII codes.
Yeah.
I'd have to test it, but I don't know 100% if that would work or not.
So a general comment that, and I don't know, maybe we can come up with a better term for it, but at the moment it's low code landmine is the one I'm going to suggest. There's a few things. I mean, low code saves you all this time most of the time, and then there's these. Every now and then I bump into these things, and you spend 5 hours on something that should have been, it should have just worked, or you would expect it would just work. So I don't know. Is anybody have a better term for that?
I think it's a bug actually. If it's happening in plant and app, and you've got two ways of doing the same thing which produce two different results, that sort of sounds like a bug that could be fixed.
Well, and yeah, and this particular one, now that we bumped against.
Oh yeah, this one. Yeah,
I was well, no, but I mean, I was hoping that then if you either on this call or afterwards, if you can share, I'd love to see this simplified down to a easy thing to reproduce, and then we can look into is there any better way that we can do it so that we clean it up for the next guy. So is it something you can show us, or something that you can provide a real simple a stripped down?
Yeah, I mean, I could provide a stripped down Razor script token, combination on one of like the built-in DNN tables, so that I'll convert that to JSON and show how it works. I mean, I have my code up, but it's like the whole complete thing. So I mean, I have the little chunk that basically is doing the reverse replace and reverse again. So if anyone wants to take a look at that particular piece of it, I can just show that real quick. But for tracking purposes for you guys, I could also like I said, give you a smaller version to show it.
It just sounds now that you have it in mind and you've just bumped up against it and solved it, I think if we could get that down, it would be worth doing. And like I say, I would love to see us solve it. Is there a reason why you didn't want to use the bracket notation, or
I just honestly, I was trying to get away from using bracket notation within Razor scripts.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt like it wasn't the appropriate way to be using it, since the dot notation was something that was given to us and available. Yep. The other concern that I had too was that when you do that, I mean, you're basically putting the bracket notation within quotes because you're dumping it into a variable. You're trying to treat it like a literal string.
Yep.
And one of my biggest fears was, what if there was something in that literal string that broke the formatting when you're trying to put it in the double quotes?
Yep.
And it wouldn't go into a variable correctly and would crash the Razor script. If I did the dot notation, it's basically returning a string that gets assigned to a variable. It's a much cleaner approach with less possibility of there being an error.
And I remember on Radu, and I think it was probably a low code cafe, showed us, hey, here's this, here's the right way to do it. And it's exactly the thing that you're talking about, but then it has this limitation. So I would like to get into it. So if you don't mind providing a repro, that would be great.
Would Ben's solution be appropriate in the contribution section that we flag as some sort of landmine? Just so that, we, even though most of the contributions are enhancements and fixes and methods, be an easy way to find it when we run into it.
I think it would be worthwhile. If you wanted to duplicate it there, that would be the great place to do it. But it's a time commitment. I don't want to speak for you. That'd be great.
No, I mean, I could put it up as a contribution. I just don't know if we want to go that route just yet and determine if this is a bug that needs to be repaired. Because if it's repaired, then a contribution becomes obsolete. So I figure I'll give you guys a chance to take a look at it first, and then if it's something that's gonna stick around for a while, then I'll put the contribution up so that other people, will have that fix. Otherwise, if it gets fixed in a hot fix or whatever, then we don't really have to worry about it too much.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that was a worthwhile one to bring up, and thanks for that. Good. Any other comments before I move on that one? Great. Let's see if I'm going to back up here. So here we are. And take a look at contributions. And this was actually, so this is the one that Don mentioned earlier. And now the site has gone to sleep. So here we go. Not too bad. Get logged in here. So in the new contributions, just the one, and this is a demonstration of how to use a listing on the left and a form on the right to edit rows. So this was just a particular configuration that Don was trying to achieve. And so what I set up was that when you click edit on something, and this is our user table, I should probably pull out the username out of this one. I'll do that. Matter of fact, I'll do that now. Not relevant to this and probably doesn't need to be displayed. So we'll pull the username out of that. So the idea then was that you pick something, and so you got a listing on the left, a form on the right, and when you click it, it fills in the form. And I've kind of limited it here a little bit. If you edit one that has a first name of Dale, you get the ability to edit the display name, but this could be extended to anything else, whatever. And so it's just kind of an instantaneous edit. Radu did something like this in a recent, I think 2 weeks ago in Cafe, where it was a pop-up instead of a left-right configuration, but really all the information for this came from that. Since Don was interested, I thought I would just talk about how that goes together. So nothing special about the listing. It has a pulling data out of the users table. We've added an edit button, so that's pretty where most of the magic is happening. So on the this is the selection. I've added an item button called edit. It has just one action on it, which is to initialize the form, and the form we're initializing, it's here on this same page, so we're able to pick it off of a list. It's the edit user form, and we're passing the ID, which is the user ID from this data table. So initialize and stop execution says, hey, make that form fill in and give it, make it reinitialize, and we're passing the ID. So this is going to be something that's on the query string that form can use. So if we save out of this and refresh, now we can take a look at the form. So the edit user form has an initialization on pre-init event that says go get all the users, where the user ID equals the get ID. Some people use query string. I use get a lot, but it's getting off the query string, it gets the ID. And if the ID happens to be blank, we're using 0. So this, it will return nothing, but at least the SQL won't crash. It's putting it into a context token called U, and that gives us what we need to be able to initialize fields. So we go to first name, and it's U first name. Likewise, last name, so U last name. Both of these I've unchecked the enabled, so it doesn't do anything. And then with the display name, I say it's only enabled if the first name is Dale. So that kind of keeps anybody from defacing all the rest of you guys. And so we're initializing it with data that's coming off the users table that got initialized. And then there's the rest of the magic happens in the button when they click save on this right side. And again, the button is only shown for username Dale, first name Dale. So we have a SQL query that updates users with the sets the display name equal to the display name that's coming from the form, and we're only doing it on the user, the ID. We don't have to default it here because if this button is visible, then we have an ID. So that SQL does the update, so you could update as many fields as you wanted to in that. And then we have this nice refresh listing. So we force the listing to be refreshed without having to force a full page refresh. And we initialize this form with the ID of 0. So by this final step, and stop execution. So this final step ends up clearing the form. And so that's how we're getting this blanked out look when you hit save. So you edit, this happens quickly here, and then you save, and it both refreshes and clears. So we see an instant activity on the grid. That's all there is to it, Don.
The refresh listing action, if I didn't notice it because I didn't think of it because of the fact the list is rather short here, and you're at the top of the list. But when you do a refresh, does it bring the list to the very top of the list? In other words, if you have a really long list of items, does the refresh do that?
Well, that's a great question. Let's see if we can make that happen. So we're I've got the list sort. We're on page 2 of 2, and we're editing.
Got it. Cool.
Saving, and it remembers that we're on page 2 because all that.
Oh, that's great.
This query. So it will. Now, I think refresh listing. If you had a resource intensive listing, you're gonna force it to recompute. So some of those very long ones would. If you had a like I say, resource intensive, it could take it a while, but something like this, it's pretty instantaneous.
Right.
But again, if you look at Cafe from 2 weeks ago, Radu did, I think he did the same thing very similarly, but he just made this form be a pop-up. And so we opened it in pop-up, and it came up.
Got it.
Very nice. So if you want to pop up for a variety instead of a left, right, this is a very simple pattern, and I like it a lot. And of course, we avoided any JavaScript or anything. All the actions are there. So that was the only contribution that we've advanced since last time.
So Dale,
yes, sir.
one thing I find interesting about that method is you're giving it an action to update the query string so the form can grab a value from it, and yet the visible query string does not change.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I don't know the answer to that. Why and yet
I kind of like it. I'm just trying to understand it. Not that I have to. I'll just accept it.
So interestingly, if you put it up there on the query string, it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why it works, and it probably has to do with it's actually doing it on the it's executing JavaScript on the page, but why? I wonder if we get the same result on a different browser.
If we were working with a pop-up form, I can imagine that the pop-up form has its own query string. It's just not showing. But, in the case where, like your example, it wasn't pop-up, it was on the page. It's just a comment of, wow, that's interesting. I wonder why it's like that. It's not critical to understand it.
And it is, it is there at some level. It's on the query string because that's where
some level.
But it's not showing. It's two different browsers and not showing.
Personally, I kind of like to not throw things up in the URL if I can, and so this kind of makes me a little happy about that.
And it actually, if you notice, I just clicked it. it's not updating this is what it amounts to, because I clicked a different one. The URL that's showing is different from the URL that it's acting on. You know, if I refresh.
After you've set one, and if you refresh the page, does it show up in there?
Well, so
That's what you just did, right?
yeah, so it's here. That's a good point. So I'll just straight refresh. So I've put one in manually, ID 3. I'm going to pick Don here, and it goes to Don. So now let's see what happens if we do this. Nope. So the browser is not being, you know, the visual is not being updated, and the so it's kind of an interesting state. It has it in this context, but as soon as we refresh the form, it goes back to the one that's up in the window. I don't know the mechanics.
Yeah, I think it's just because it's not a page level query string. It's a query string that's only consumed by that form on the right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Dale, I had a question as well. I really appreciate all the demos that we're seeing here, but the use of raw SQL kind of concerns me, and I just wonder if you can give a little briefing on that. Everything we develop for the web has been wrapped in stored procedures. And so is that still recommended here, or is there some other mechanism to make sure that there's no risk of SQL injection attacks? Do you know much about that?
I know a little bit. So let's see what let's look at this edit user. That's where we're seeing that. But if anyone else on the call, particularly from our side of the has information, I mean, these you know, so using the binding parameters actually, this is poorly formed. I really should do this better. So user ID equals, instead of doing that, I should have said at user ID, pass it a parameter. So by binding it this way, this would prevent an injection. The other way that I had originally would not have prevented injection.
Good to know.
So using the parameters is one level of security. Is anyone? I mean, the stored procedures obviously A, work, and B, provide the protection as well. But
Also have the sanitize feature for forms.
I might suggest that in the future, 1 or 2 demos might include store procedure only view of the world. So we've seen better security, but also a layer of indirection where we don't have to call on our development team to make small tweaks to some of the logic that we have on our website. We can do those small tweaks in the store procedures. So it's actually kind of a dual benefit. One is better security. One is being able to make minor tweaks without having to redo stuff on our website, module wise.
And then I think the larger that a system grows, I mean, the more difficult it is to maintain, to have all that SQL all over the place. So if you take that policy of stored procedure only, then it gives you a place to always go to see where all those things are.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. What else? I can go on to other things. Jim had a question about using, we've been promising using console for debugging as a topic, and also identify slow performing parts of a page. I could talk about this a little bit, but I'm not an expert. Radu really is, and my hope, and I think our goal with the last couple of cafe segments with Radu was to dive more into the API, and it hasn't happened that he's gotten that deep into the API. Is really more, I mean, he's been shown some good techniques, but he hasn't gotten into the API and the debugging part of it. So I'm still hopeful that we'll get him to do that in more detail. So that's one answer. The other answer is I can happily show you what I know, and it will be more limited than what Radu could show, or Bogdan. You know, oftentimes I'm dealing with a problem with him, and he's, you know, he pops that open and knows right where to go look. It's a little bit foreign to me, but in the absence of objection, I will give that a try on this form. So right-click inspect, and I see these guys do layouts. I'm not really good at get them to, probably maybe even should have left it docked. I don't know. Let's see. All right. So on the console, this is this is one of the main ones. Just from a when something isn't working right, and you report that to me on the help center. This is the kind of thing, okay, I clicked this button, something didn't happen, or I'm not seeing what I expected. A lot of times errors will appear in the console, and there's a lot of JavaScript that we're providing. A lot of you can provide JavaScript. Sometimes they're just in conflict, or what you're doing. For example, if you have a JavaScript that's flat blowing up, it may be preventing ours from running at all. And so seeing an error happen brings it to, okay, I fix that, and then all the things start to run. So that's one reason to get to the console at all. So let's see what happens when we start clicking things.
Dale, another thing that we can take a look at is we can actually answer the question we had earlier about the parameter.
Perfect.
Yeah, for the form that you're looking at there. So when you if you go to the network tab and then click on the fetch XHR option next to all on the click there, and now click one of your edit buttons, and now go back, and you can see that initialize form. Click on the initialize form one there, and then you can see, if you highlight over it, you can see in there where the ID is actually being passed to the form. It's initialize form, and is that all the way? Yeah, so it's on the second line right there where you have the request URL. I think it's somewhere in there. I know, I just saw it on mine just a minute ago. But that's where the ID is being passed to the form. It's on that initialize form call right there.
Line ID equals 0. Is that the right one?
It shouldn't be 0 because.
Oh, that's portal ID.
Yeah, that's portal ID.
A little brute force here.
Oh, Patrick, that's good to know.
Yeah. So, but the reason why it doesn't work when you reload the page is because the form is reinitializing, and it's getting the ID from the URL at that point. But once you click the edit button again, the form is initialized over, and it's being passed that way. There's a lot of things that you can discover if you look at these calls right here. Like if you're having a problem with an API or something like that, you can go here to the network tab, and you can look at the call and actually look at the parameters that are being passed. There it is. Yep, there's your ID right there.
So now that we spotted it there, we could probably spot it here. ID equals 2. There it is.
Yep. Yep.
That's fetch XHR in network.
Yep.
Okay.
So So yeah, good, absolute great case to bring up, Patrick, about using this to debug now. So let's see what happens as we hit save. So there was a submit, and we have a payload. I'm sorry, here's the form data, Dale Warner.
Yep.
So that payload is there to take a look at. And then this is the answer that came back. We look at the headers, and I assume that the ID, the ID is still here. So now let's go to our goofy one where we provided it.
But you can also see that after you did the submission, the form was reinitialized again right after that. So you can just it's handy to see all that information.
All right, so I'm going to clean this up and say ID equals 3, and we forced it to be on the one that's LCE, but I'm going to click edit on 2. So we have this condition where the query string is one thing, but the form is displaying the other. So let's see if we look at so the initialized form ID equals 2. So we can see there's the discrepancy, not even discrepancy, the internal URL that was used to initialize that form. So then when we save and we see the submit, it is still based on that ID. And another initialized form happens, and now we see the ID 0, which is where we flipped it to. We explicitly said we want to reload it with 0, and this get data. Oh, this is probably where the form is going out and getting what it needs to get. I think, yeah.
Actually, or the grid is, yep. That's refreshing the grid.
Yep, and so here's all the response that came back. This is now I'm just poking around at stuff, right? So I'm interested to see.
And this is exactly what I do sometimes. I just poke around until I see what I want to find. It's kind of funny how sometimes that's what it is.
So I took that JSON that came back on that grid thing, on that grid initialized. And so now all the data that we see, all the data that's visible on the grid, here it is for inquiry, right? So that's interesting. All right. Did I just close my whole window out there? Probably. Yeah, let's try again.
So on the first part of that networking tab, before you went, are all those timings, actual timing of each of those calls that it's making? So you could
yeah, it is. So you can look for those long running things. Sorry, I got to find my way back here. All right. So network. So yeah, when we do a refresh of the page, every single thing that it does is being logged in here, and so you can see a lot of activity and what it's about and how long it takes. And yeah, when something doesn't return, I mean, sometimes do an API call and it'll sit and maybe never return, or an error happens. These will be red. You'll see a status other than 200, and So that's something that you can dig in, investigate, see what there might be an error message associated with it. And then on the console, this is where Radu was doing a lot of work, where we're working with the DNN-SF thing. Let me not make this maximize. It wants to do what it wants to do. So taking a look here at this form, I think this is going to tell us here. Okay, so it's number 629. So the form is 629. We could interact with the form as 629. Except we don't want to refresh here. So hide and open, and let's see, just play in here. Open pop-up by ID. That might be fun. I don't know what these parameters are. ETN.
That's always the issue. And every time I have to go and I have to find where I used it before to remember the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, remembering the parameters that we need to put in there is the,
Well, let's see, initialize form is straightforward. We can say, what was it, 693? So if we were to go into edit and then repeat that, but it's doing it with this. Make sure I have 629. No wonder it's not working. So, and there's ways so you can set values. You can there's a whole a number of things, and I think I did share the link last time. Let me find it again, and this might be useful at this point.
You know, I spend significant time in this console testing little JavaScript or jQuery things that I'm doing in the form. Is there a trick that would allow me to grab the jQuery that I've put in like a binding to and copy it and paste it out here in the console and have it work in the context of, you know, referring to a field name with the square brackets as a token? You know, I put it out here in the console window and it's not aware of, it's probably out of scope is what it is, but it's not aware of the field values anymore.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Can I put it into context? Can I put it into scope with some kind of forms? I don't know, command.
Yeah.
What these smart guys know that I don't know?
Nothing. You're ahead of us. It's a lot of question.
Yeah, I have to. Well, I mean, I do it. I just rewrite it so that it's in scope in the console.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Hmm. That's what I've done before too.
Dale, is that something you can share in chat? That the doc, the Google Doc, or is
Absolutely.
it internal?
Nope, it's what we call early draft. Let me put it in the chat. So this is publicly viewable, and the hope is that we're going to put it into the documentation in a nice form eventually. Oop, let's see. Yeah, it worked. Who's in there? Yep, Mr. Patrick. All right.
Yeah, it worked. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Yeah. So yeah, that understanding what ones are out there. So you've seen Rada do it where he's using the type ahead or knowing that JavaScript. Is that what you call type ahead or sense?
IntelliSense.
IntelliSense, thank you. So, if you know kind of where you're going, you can get it to tell you and remind you and help you get there what's available for you. But, and then let's see, this is, apparently we're going to the new format and it's not here on this particular page yet. So, okay, so yep, shared. Thanks for asking that question. Just a second here. So yeah, we've quickly come to the limit of what I know about that. So I will continue to ask and get Radu involved. Again, cover it more in depth. So let's see other things.
Just another note there, and I'm sure that everyone on this call probably does this, but I think it's worth this mentioning is that I use when I'm doing some JavaScript, in a bind expression or something like that when I'm working on a form, I use console.log all the time, just so I can confirm, okay, so what values am I actually getting out here, and that sort of thing. And so I find that incredibly useful, and I'm sure most of you do that too, but I just wanted to mention it just in case.
So yeah, that's a great one. If we were to go to the events that are connected with this form, and we could add a can we do it?
Or you could have something on the field. That's the other thing, and that's probably when I've used it most often is so in the bind expression on the field when I'm doing an on change, and I'm trying to do something complex here. That's say I'm trying to update values in another field or something like that. I'll do the console.log to see that whatever token I'm using is actually coming through the way I'm intending. If I'm having trouble figuring out why something's not working the way I want to.
So we have a field display name. Just at a brute force level, we have a field display name. It has an ID of display name. We're doing a bind expression on change click. So every time this changes, we'll do a console log of whatever the value of display name is, and we could say
yep, something like that.
Yep. So now if we were to go in, we got to force this thing into edit mode. So we'll pick me here and say, actually, let's go ahead and get the console up. Probably could figure out how to dock that, but whatever.
And you see how it's
it says 7 of them.
Yeah.
And apparently that's the wrong syntax because it's showing form field value. It's not showing us the actual value, so I don't have the right syntax in there yet.
I think you need to move the token outside of the single quotes.
So
Yeah, do a plus. Yep. And then you could actually use form.fields.displayName.value. Yep. Yep, something like that. Anybody else want to jump in?
It looks good there without the quote, outside of the quote.
Yep.
So you can see every change. So that so yes, throwing things into the log is a console log is a good technique. Another thing that goes with that is that okay, so this is one I've done before. Over here on the right, you have the debugger. This is the VM4167. This is the line where this is happening. So if we go into the debugger, and I'll make this big, it's taking that bind expression and building an expression for us. Console log display name is now whatever. So it's taken exactly what we typed and put it into this little bit of JavaScript that's then executing. If you make that be a breakpoint, this is then a way to get to that point in your code. And so then you'll have all the context. So if now I type one more thing, now we're in debugger mode because it executed that again, it bumped into the breakpoint. And now everything over here on within the scope, you can query the scope. So you can, for example, now I don't know necessarily, local this, that's not the right. Okay, here's form, the ID, the fields. So you can, if we were to want to see how last name is constructed and how to interact with it, if you're trying to figure out how to interact with something, now you see all these things. And so potentially you can say, okay, I could do form.fields.lastname.value equal and pick something else, and you can start manipulating or figuring out interactively how to accomplish something on the form, and then having or where a particular value is or the thing that you're looking for is, and then once you kind of have stumbled using that interactive way to stumble into the syntax that you can then use in your JavaScript. Does that make sense? So set a breakpoint and then with a console log. And then like if you had a far more complex JavaScript, the things that, you know, that you have, maybe you've got some variables and you've done some computations, and now you can inquire into your JavaScript. Okay, what's the value of A? What's the value of B? Why didn't it work? It's a debugging thing. Then you just hit run. Let's see, run, and it goes back to, you know, hopefully that's useful to somebody.
That is.
Okay. Let's see, having stumbled around in the debugger for all this time, we've come to the end of our hour. Any last thoughts before I wind this up and we go to our unrecorded afterglow segment?
Do you want to call any attention to the feature requests capability?
I do. That's an ongoing thing in our community portal, and my hope was that we start looking at these as part of our regular Campfire to see what's been submitted, but they're here in community.plantonapp.com under feature requests, and I see we're starting to get some. I've posted one. I struggled my way through figuring out how to create a gravatar. Wasn't that hard, and so you know, got my picture on here, and that's really the main thing, right? It's all about.
Just so you guys know, I did add another two pieces. Number one, if you vote on something, you're going to see under the votes, it'll tell you that you voted on it. It'll show like a little ballot with a checkbox on it icon. And also, when you're logged in, if you click on your own Gravatar icon, it'll actually send you to the Gravatar page to set up your Gravatar.
Bless you.
Nice.
Yeah, good improvements. So let's see. So I apparently haven't voted on anything yet. Let's see if I can I vote on my own thing?
You should.
Yes, you can.
That's the first vote.
But only
if you're doing it
once.
Right.
Where do we vote?
Thumbs up.
Do you
Hit the
write
thumbs
this
up
in
at the top.
Chicago? Vote early, vote often?
Yeah, I just got 2 votes. Moving up.
See, I didn't know I could vote on my own things. That's a double hit right there, right? I post it and I vote on it. All right. So now we see. Good. I like that. That's a nice one. So cool. So my hope is that we'll start going through these, and since there's going to be a lot of them very quickly, maybe we'll look where the votes are and chat about them, or you can bring your case to the group and beg for votes. Sure, why not?
Is this also the same place that we should be putting in not just features of the code that's there, but like new modules, new add-ons? For instance, I asked in the tickets for an Elevon gateway, and the ticket says it's being considered or something like that. The project is heating up and the client is saying, yeah, I think we're going to go this route, which means I'm going to be stuck without having the payment gateway for them. I was wondering how one elevates that, and throwing money at it is not a problem. Is not an option. So how does one push that kind of thing to happen?
First of all, obviously feature request didn't exist before, so you didn't have that option at the time. I think it's
Right.
a fine place asking for add-ons. I think on your, mentioning to me now, I'll circle back on it. But if you would reply to your console ticket and say, what's the status of this? That will also bring it to my attention.
Great, will do.
And I just don't know. And just for clarity, what you were saying was you can't throw money at it, or you'd be happy to throw money at it.
We can throw money at it.
Okay. How much? No.
What's it worth to you? And we got illegal voting and bribery tonight. That's our today. That's great.
But I think that's a good place to stop the recording. So with that, thank you guys all for showing up, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week.